Over to you, Laura.
That's exactly what we're talking about, Catherine Nicholson. Thank you very much indeed. Because just a week ago, he said he'd do whatever it takes to save the Eurozone. Remember that? Well, today, ECB Chief Mario Draghi sought to lay out exactly how he plans to do that. Take a listen.
Risk premia that are related to fears of the reversibility of the euro are unacceptable, and they need to be addressed in a fundamental manner. The euro is irreversible. The Governing Council, within its mandate to maintain price stability over the medium term, may undertake outright open market operations of a size adequate to reach its objective.
Rough translation, the European Central Bank may intervene in the bond markets by buying short-term debt. It's hoped that will ease the dangerously high borrowing costs for countries like Italy and Spain, because here is the problem. Spain and Italy are having to pay a lot more money to borrow on international markets than their Eurozone neighbours. Here you can see Greece, Spain, Italy and France and Germany, a huge difference in the spread they have to pay on borrowing over the 10-year period. Well, that's making it very difficult for them to get their economies back on track. Investors, though, were unimpressed today by Mario Draghi's comments. Bond yields for Spain and Italy both spiked on the news, while European stocks took a tumble. Here they are at the close of today's trade. There we can see London, Paris and Frankfurt all down more than 2% here in Paris, whereas in Madrid and Milan, a whopping fall of 5.16% and just under 5% for Milan as well. So one analyst complaining today, this is no way to leave the markets for the summer. Here to discuss tonight, Thierry Philippona. He's the Secretary General of the organisation Finance Watch. Good evening to you. Good to have you with us. Also here with us is Danny Lang. He's an economist and a member of Appalled Economists. He's also an associate professor at Paris 13. That's a university here in Paris. He's also written this book. It's called Europe Mistreated, is how we translate it, isn't it?
Europe Mistreated, yes.
Europe Mistreated, all right. That's presumably why you're appalled.
It will be translated into English, like the other book.
All right, all will become clear. All right, we're hoping also to be joined tonight in Athens by Yanis Varoufakis. He's a professor of economics at Athens University, while in New York, Rafael Douadi is the co-founder and research director at the organisation Risk Data. He's also works for the CNRS and is a member of the think tank Club Praxis. Also with us, last but certainly not least, our very own business editor, Matthew Warren. Good to see you with us as well, Matthew. All right, let's get straight to it then. Thierry, those comments today by Mario Draghi were widely anticipated, weren't they? There was a lot of expectations resting on them, but clearly not the big bazooka everyone was hoping for.
No, I mean, I think what clearly came out of today's press conference is that, yes, Mario Draghi repeated that he will do everything it takes to save the euro within the limits of his mandate. And he insisted several times on that, within the limits of his mandate. And he repeated and emphasized several times also that his mandate is about fighting inflation. And by the way, we're not talking about fighting inflation here. We're talking about something else. So at the end of the day, we find ourselves with a central bank that has a mission of fighting an enemy which is not today's enemy. No wonder markets are not reacting well. But in the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't pay too much attention. I mean, it's not an objective as such to have markets reacting well, but no wonder we're not solving the euro crisis.
Rafael Douadi, what's your take on it? Some say perhaps the markets, their expectations were a little too high, and that's why we're seeing this fallback today. What's your view on that?
Well, the first thing is I'm half surprised by the reaction of the market to the speech of Mr. Draghi, because, for instance, it's just a matter of communication. When you assert all the time you cannot exit from the euro is strong, etc., it's surprisingly enough expresses fears on it. So market has fears on the euro, and they were expecting very concrete measures. They did not get it, they reacted. There is nothing surprising in here. Markets tend to overreact all the time, and we know that. Now, the question is more the question of the union of the action of the different actors of Europe. And here we have the ECB, but also the big question is about the consultation between what people tend to call the Southern Europe, and I would like to include France in here, with respect to Northern Europe and especially Germany, where we know that we have very opposite views on how to say. But in the end, the end objective, and that's maybe where I agree on the comments of Mr. Filippono, but if you look at the reality behind, the Germans have always been acting at the last minute, you know, and they not being happy, but always acting to save Europe. And in fact, in the truth, I'm kind of confident precisely because it's the interest of nobody in Europe to let the euro go. Even selfish interests would push any country, including Germany, to do whatever they can to save the euro.
Right. And I mean, let's just remind ourselves of what Draghi said. He said the euro is irreversible, echoing comments he made last week. He also said, don't bother betting otherwise, it's not worth it. I mean, are we getting enough reassurance here?
Well, people
Sorry,
don't,
I'm putting that one to
I mean,
Danny Lang. I'm sorry, Raphael. I'm putting that one to you, Danny. Jump right in.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I agree on the idea that the markets have overreacted to this, but what could we expect? The main interest rate in Europe is already low, 0.75%. And maybe he could have changed one of the other key interest rate, but I don't want to go into technical details. But when banks want to leave their money at the central bank, they can leave it at zero now. Maybe he could have brought that under zero to give
Negative
incentives
interest rates.
Yeah. Some central banks did that, but this wouldn't have changed much. The key issue today is the fiscal policy issues. I don't think that monetary policy issue is the key issue, despite of the fact that we should really change the treaty in order to allow the central bank to intervene much more massively on the markets in order to stop the debt crisis in Europe.
So do you also think the ECB's mandate is still too narrow?
I pretty share that point of view. It's too narrow. The main goal of the ECB is to fight against inflation. And as Mr. Draghi correctly stated today, there is no inflationary risk currently in the Eurozone. So
It's the least of our problems, isn't it? Inflation. Matthew Warren, do you think there was a lack of information today? I mean, we know that these comments are watched very, very closely by the markets. And as I said, he did get everyone's expectations up last week. But he seemed to be a little bit teasing to we'll do a bit more later down the line. But for now, here's where we are. What did you think about that?
Yes, and you have to wonder what's been going on behind the scenes in these discussions we know have been taking place over the last few days. Were there more things that they wanted to announce? He talked about these measures that they're going to work out the detail over the next few weeks. I think the other thing that was not surprising, actually, it was very characteristic of Mario Draghi, was that before he actually got to the measures that they're talking about, these buying bonds in the market in consultation with the bailout funds, he stressed again that he wants governments to take action. He's desperate to avoid this feeling that governments just look to the ECB to sort everything out. He said, again, there's got to be a long-term vision for Europe. He wants labour reforms. He wants there to be an increase in competitiveness as well. And also, I think in the way he talked about the bailout funds and how they might work, he was pretty clear, I think, there, I see what you think, but that he thinks if Spain, for example, is going to benefit from this bond buying, they have to go to the bailout funds first, because what that means is they will have to then submit themselves to certain conditions. He doesn't want to just be seen as, providing lots of largesse to countries that are struggling.
Thierry, that's right, isn't it? The ECB is not offering money for nothing here.
No, absolutely. I mean, they're still under that constraint, which comes all the way back from the Maastricht Treaty, where central banks are not allowed to finance directly fiscal deficits. So that's one of his big constraints, and he's saying if you're going to be doing that, you're going to go to the funds with the EFSF and the ESM, okay, and they will impose conditions upon you, but don't come to me because it's not my mandate to do it. And he went even further, saying that there's no way that, and he repeated that twice, I think, that he as ECB could lend money to ESM, EFSF because he was not allowed to, and he went to legal debate about that. But beyond the legal debate, there's the strict principle of no central bank funding of governments. which takes us to the heart of the issue. And I think Mario Draghi said something which is very true, that the whole issue is, before anything else, political. Because the source of the problem is that the euro is not a complete currency. By not being a complete currency, what we mean, we being all the people who've analyzed that, is that A, there is no such thing as a European taxpayer, and B, the European Central Bank is not allowed to monetize, as we say in jargon, in other words, to finance, the states
throw money at the
directly.
problem.
Yes. And Mario Draghi says, if you want to have a European taxpayer, you first need to have political union, which is what Germany is saying, and they're right in saying that, and that's something that is very important.
All right, let's bring in Athens now. Yanis Varoufakis is with us now from Athens University. Greece, of course, a recipient of bailout funds from the European Union and the IMF. It's currently putting into place strict austerity measures to try and pay that money back. If the ECB had waded in earlier, Greece might not be in such a painful situation that it's in now.
I don't think we can pin Greece's problems on the ECB. We should pin it firstly on the Greek government, but primarily on a particularly bad error committed by the Eurozone 2 years ago. The Greek state went bankrupt in early 2010. And the Eurozone decided, in its great wisdom, to deal with this insolvency, which, by the way, came in hand with the insolvency of the Greek banking sector, by means of huge, expensive loans on condition of austerity, which shrinks the national income from which those loans will have to be repaid. There is a profound error in this logic, and the result of this error is that good money is being thrown after bad into a black hole, while the Greek social economy is imploding. And that is an impossible situation.
Do you think we're moving in the right direction now, though? I mean, the ECB is trying to act to bring down the cost of borrowing. We've seen that borrowing costs for Greece are, of course, among the highest in the Eurozone. If the ECB intervenes, it will bring those borrowing costs down. It will at least make it easier for the Greek government to get the economy back on track.
It would be a little bit of help, but I just don't see it happening. What I see is a president of the ECB who understands the enormity of the problem that he's facing, who understands that the ECB is the only institution of the Eurozone that can actually act in order to keep the Eurozone from disintegrating, who makes a huge pronouncement the other day suggesting that the ECB will step in when the time is right in order to save the Eurozone from disintegration. But when it comes to the crunch, he just can't deliver. He's not allowed, because of political constraints, as we just heard, to deliver. And that diminished today the office of the president of the ECB substantially. And I think this is going to have profoundly negative effects on the whole of the Eurozone.
All right. Now, of course, the Germans are most opposed to the ECB throwing unlimited liquidity at Eurozone states who are struggling. Yesterday we heard the head of the Bundesbank, of course, warning the bank against straying outside its remit. Is the ECB and other EU institutions too answerable to the Germans? Is that part of the problem?
I don't know, but I pretty much agree with what the people said here on many issues, and I really think that it wouldn't be such an issue to put money in the economy in the current context. US did that, and their inflation rate is really low. That's not the main issue today. The main issue today is activity, the economic activity, and you can see that in the communiqué of the.
No, but it's also about bringing down borrowing costs, isn't it? Because that's
part
of the problem.
Sure. It is
if you have to pay so much to pay back your debts.
But in order to bring down the borrowing costs, which is a top priority in the Eurozone, the first thing we have to do is to change the mandate of the central bank. We must allow this bank to buy bonds on the primary market. And the Germans don't want to hear about this because they think that this would be inflationary. But in that case, look at the US. They do that, and there would be huge inflation there.
They also have a huge public debt. They also have a huge public debt, unprecedented levels of public debt.
Yeah, but that's not the main issue today. It's not the main issue. It would be the issue if we would have 3, 4, or even 5% of inflation, but that's not the case at all. We are far away from this. Our main concern today is activity. Growth is too low in Europe. We need to stimulate growth. And that's what Mr. Draghi said in some kind of way. But what kind of recipe he recommends? It's a bit weird because what he recommends for the whole Europe is exactly what Greece has done over the past 2 years, Italy, Spain, and look at where they are. Austerity measures, flexibilization of the labor market, it didn't work. So I'm a little bit surprised by this aspect of things. But share that point of view that the main concern is Europe is growth.
Thierry, are the Germans wrong to demand some kind of reform in return for this liquidity?
They are right to ask for reform because if we go back to the point of you need two things to solve the euro crisis, i.e. European taxpayers and the ability of the central bank to fund deficits, in order to have European taxpayers, you need political reform. So the Germans are right to ask for that. And by the way, on that particular case, it's countries much more like France who are digging heels and going against that. Mm-hmm. But they're wrong, I think, to go against funding of deficits by a central bank. I'm not saying that it's neutral. I'm not saying that it's trivial to print money at the end of the day to finance deficits. But in the grand scheme of things, you have to make choices. And the best illustration of that particular point can be found in a comparison between Spain and the UK. Both countries have very similar debt and fiscal situations, broadly speaking, okay? But in one case, you have a complete currency, pound sterling, okay? Mm-hmm. And interest rates in the UK are more or less 1.5%. In the other case, you have very similar economic and fiscal situations, but in complete currency, the euro and borrowing rates are more or less at 7%. In one case, the situation needs to be managed. See, UK situation is not easy, but it's manageable.
The UK is not in recession, is it? The Spanish economy is in recession.
I mean,
there was lackluster growth, for sure.
UK does have some serious economic problems, but at least it can refinance itself, it can fund itself, and monetary situation is under control. When in the case of Spain, the euro situation makes it degenerate. When a situation is bad, it makes it even worse, which is what we're talking about. Monetary policy cannot solve everything, and Mario Draghi was right in saying that. It cannot solve everything, but monetary policy should not make things worse when they're really bad.
It's tied to an artificially high currency right now. It's about flexibility, isn't it, Matthew?
Yes, it is, and it's true what you say about the UK and Spain. They have the flexibility there, even if the fundamentals don't look so great either. They have the freedom to do it. But we have to remember, of course, that Germany not only has the most powerful and biggest economy in Europe, and therefore feels, with some justification, what it knows how to do these things. Of course, it also is the major contributor to these bailout funds, at least a quarter of the current bailout fund, and so it feels a huge sense of ownership and need to control how it gets spent.
Okay, all right, hold that thought. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, the international headlines and the second part of our debate. Don't go away.